Victor's private quarters in his personal world, Victor's office. Still in their god forms but without their armor and dress, Victor and Violet were talking. While reviewing the reports she had missed due to the previous events, Violet exclaimed when she saw something. What? You approved of our daughters going to the Empire? Yes, Victor spoke as if it were something simple. N/O/vel/b/in.c/om. Violet's draconic eyes narrowed, and the crown on her head began to spin. You damn. She clenched her teeth in frustration. Currently, the two of them were in the office, and Victor was sitting in the chair, while Violet was sitting on his lap. Due to the stress earlier, she was recharging her batteries with vitamin V. Don't give me a simple, yes, she imitated his emperor expression perfectly. Explain what happened. Why would you let our daughters join the Empire's management so soon? Ma, calm down, honey. Victor patted her head as he pulled her back into his chest. Violet's eyes widened, her momentum slowed, and she took a deep breath of his scent, soon becoming completely docile. She moaned happily as she felt another load being deposited inside her. No wonder Velnora doesn't use her powers to make herself smaller. Doing things at this size is quite exciting. Violet thought vaguely as she enjoyed her orgasm. Because they were 5 meters tall now, their entire bodies had become larger to suit their size. This applied to their liquids as well, which were forming a small puddle on the floor. After fully enjoying another dose of vitamin V inside her, she made sure to stand up a little and abruptly descend, completely trapping the member inside her, thus trapping the vitamin in her procreation room. She intertwined her legs around Victor more tightly, and with her right arm, she placed her hand on Victor's immense jewels. Don't think this tactic will work on me anymore, darling. Violet narrowed her eyes as she gently caressed Victor's jewels, but was obvious that these caresses could change to violence at any moment. I am the Empress, and as Empress, it is my duty to accept everything from my Emperor that may work with others, but not with me, who has known you the longest. Now. Explain. She narrowed her eyes as she lightly squeezed Victor's jewels. Victor didn't feel threatened since even if something happened to his body, he could just regenerate, and his body was immensely stronger than all his wives. He was practically invulnerable, and even opening a cut in his skin was hard work. What Violet was doing now didn't apply as a threat. Seeing Victor's amused smile and seeing him continue his caresses as if he were dealing with an unruly child, Violet growled. She wouldn't mind this treatment later, but when it came to her daughters, she wasn't willing to give in. You leave me no choice, darling. I didn't want to do this to the Empire's jewels that I love so much at night, but you left me no choice. You awakened the demon me. Victor raised an eyebrow when he saw his wife acting like an anime character. For some reason, he began to get a bad feeling. Violet stood up from his member, causing the liquids to leak from her insides and completely dirtying the floor. She moved away from Victor a little and pointed the palm of her hand at him. The crown on her head began to spin a little faster, and her eyes shone. Seeing Violet with messy hair, covered in sweat, and with liquids leaking from her insides was not threatening in any way. In fact, it was very sexy, but for some reason, Victor's instincts were warning him of danger, and Victor, as always, listened to his instincts. A violet magic circle appeared in Violet's hand, secret technique 01, testicular torsion. When Violet's energy hit his barrier, Victor genuinely broke out in a cold sweat. After all, this was a technique that directly attacked the soul information responsible for generating the male reproductive organs. It was a technique that could only be blocked by someone like him who could control the soul, a technique to cause the greatest possible pain to the male individual. Understanding this, he couldn't help but scream, "My horror, you monster. You've created such an abominable technique." Tisk, as expected, it didn't work. You damn overpowered character. If this one doesn't work, I have another one. Determined, Violet continued pointing her palm at him. You still have more. Secret technique 02, phallic reduction. A beam of energy shot out from Violet's hand and hit Victor's barrier. Once again, Victor broke out in a cold sweat. Just like the previous attack, this was an attack aimed at the soul's information. If this attack were to hit a being, it could only be repaired by a soul master. What an abominable technique. Even if one used body modification, they wouldn't be able to increase the size of their equipment because the soul wouldn't recognize the change. TSK, it didn't work, huh? Don't worry, my sisters and I have developed 99 secret techniques. Violet became even more determined. That many? You guys actually created something useless. You think so, darling? I find these techniques very useful for demoralizing enemies, fufufu. Victor opened his mouth to speak but fell silent when he realized the genuine wartime applications these would have on their enemies. With Violet's power, she could cover an entire army easily, and if she unleashed the secret technique, testicular torsion, on those enemies. Victor wiped the cold sweat from his face. What an abominable technique. Who needs planet-cracking attacks if the enemy can demoralize you with a simple wave of their hand? You let your guard down. Secret technique 03, impotence. Secret technique 04, quick shot. Secret technique 05, explosive diarrhea. Victor dodged all the energy beams, making his huge member swing around. Explosive diarrhea? Can the enemy concentrate on the fight if he has an overwhelming urge to go to the bathroom? Violet smiled. Victor had no words to respond. Darling, my love, the greatest weakness of living beings is their flesh, and there are various means of attacking their flesh: disease, psychological fears, mental attacks. The physical body is a weakness. And even if the enemies were machines, Velnora could control them with her technology. Even if the enemies are monsters, they still need to perform their basic physiological processes. What good is an army of dragons if I can immobilize them all with just an explosive diarrhea spell? Muhahaha. Violet laughed like a cliché villain. Victor was simply too impressed with his wife's thinking. After all her points were valid, which sparked a wave of urgency in him. I must protect my soldiers from these techniques. Victor's paranoid side had already started making plans so that the enemy wouldn't use this against them. The door opened, and Hilda Snow entered the room. Emperor, Empress, I am here too. She stopped talking when she saw the two leaders of the Empire completely naked, with Violet laughing like crazy, which was something normal. After all, this was Violet we are talking about. She may have become more serious, but she was still the same Violet in private. Ailda's eyes went to Victor's member, and she swallowed hard. Then they went to Violet, specifically to her lower area, and she swallowed hard again due to the amount liquids that were leaking. The pheromones from that place were driving her crazy. Suddenly, Violet stopped laughing, and her face became completely stoic. Secret Technique 90. Deep Depression. Victor raised an eyebrow as a miasma erupted out of Violet's body and spread throughout the area. Just like before, this technique directly attacked the soul, rendering those attacked entirely unmotivated and depressed, and could even lead to them committing suicide. Another abominable technique. But effective. Techniques 90 through 99 mainly deal with debilitating states of mind and mental illnesses. With a wave of his hand, he quickly shielded Hilda from getting caught in the crossfire. The origin of these techniques. I assume Hela and Alice Moriarty, the witch who specializes in curses, helped you, right? Tufufu, as expected of darling, you guessed right. But you forgot a name. Persephone also helped. Me. Well, she was the goddess of the underworld for the longest time. Victor thought it made sense to ask for Persephone's help as well. But I must say, you really did a good job. You're amazing, Violet. These techniques are very useful for war potential. Later, can you give me a list of secret techniques so I can formulate countermeasures for our soldiers? Victor skillfully pressed the sensitive spots that his wife loved. Although, that said, he truly was genuinely surprised. With these techniques, he could easily predict that Violet initially started working on them as a joke, but later, this joke evolved into something serious. The smile on Violet's face grew when she heard these words, of course. She stopped using her technique, and soon, the depressing atmosphere returned to normal. Lady Violet. Hilda? How long have you been here? With a wave of her hand, Violet organized the entire room and got rid of the excess liquids on the floor. However, she did not cover her modesty. After all, she was in her house and in Victor's quarters. Only her sisters and longtime maids like Hilda could enter this area. Victor, just like Violet, did not cover himself while helping Violet fix things and sat back down in his chair. As if it were something completely normal, Violet walked up to Victor with her hips swaying seductively and sat on his lap again, impaling herself completely on his member. I'm where I'm supposed to be. She turned her face and kissed Victor lovingly while squeezing her insides possessively. Hilda remained expressionless at this display of affection, but due to her new condition, she was struggling to keep it up. Victor gave Violet a light slap on the ass. He pulled away from her before her fire could fully ignite and said, concentrate. That's true. Taking a deep breath, she looked back at Hilda, and smelling Hilda's arousal, she let out a small smile. Come to think of it. This is unfair. What's unfair? The Fulger clan has 3 generations of women as your wives. In fact, it's 4 generations if you count our. Well, anyways, it's unfair. We should even the playing fields. Maybe I should resurrect my grandmother. In the meantime, I will take advantage of this and resurrect Skathaka's and Eleanor's mothers. That way, all 4 generations of the 4 main Nightingale vampire clans will be in your bed. Fufufu, won't that be fun? I won't even begin to explain how impossible this plan is. After all, you know how life and death work, and they died a long time ago. Unlike his disciple's daughter, who was a human, the women mentioned previously where the primordial soul system was treated. Supernatural beings. The priority of collecting their souls differently due to their power. That's truck. For now. Victor smiled. One day, I will make it happen. After all, I'm sure you will be able to do it in the future. Your faith in me is very beautiful, my wife. Victor showed a small smile. Of course. She snorted and spoke seriously as she held Victor's face and looked into his violet eyes. With possession. If I don't have faith in my husband, who will? The small smile on Victor's face disappeared, and he looked at her with an intensity that made Violet's insides tighten. Just like her husband, as his wife, she also knew how to push her partner's buttons. And Victor's weakness was speaking honestly with intense feelings. It always worked and made him ignore everything around him. Violet smiled internally, and with a gesture of her hand, the door to this room was locked. Hilda swallowed hard. Violet turned her face to Hilda and, with a gesture of her hand, called her, "Come on, Hilda." Her smile grew. The Snow clan must match the Fulger clan. Now, no one was forcing her, and Hilda could, at any time, say she didn't want to, and Violet would promptly opened the doors to the room. Although, she would be a little disappointed. After all, she wouldn't be able to match the Fulger clan's efficiency. But even so, she wouldn't force Hilda to do anything she didn't want to do. After all, Hilda was like a mother to Violet. Violet only took this action because she knew Hilda very well and knew that she also liked Victor. But until now, she hadn't taken any action because she was always busy and because it wouldn't be honorable to do so when she had been a servant of the Snow clan for so long. Despite this, Violet knew that her plan would work. She knew that Hilda would accept. After all, she had the trick of looking a few minutes into the future to give her an advantage. Hilda took a deep breath and slowly placed her hand on the lace of her maid dress, and slowly its size began to grow. The maid dress fell to the floor, revealing Hilda's black garter belt and bra. Violet smiled even wider inwardly. With this, Yuki is left, and all the important pieces of the Snow clan will be complete. Then I should look at the others. Thinking back on her actions just now, Violet couldn't help but think back to the past. If my past self saw my actions now, she would try to kill me and skin me. I was so insecure, huh? When a golden light appeared in the room, Violet's smile outwardly grew even wider, and she stopped thinking about the past. Violet, why did you call M-? Agnes appeared in her goddess form, and when she saw the sight in front of her, she exclaimed. Oh. Then, without needing to say anything, she made her divine raiment disappear, leaving behind a white garter belt similar to Hilda's. Mother and daughter got along very well, but the daughter had other plans. A glow covered Victor and Violet while they were connected, and the same glow covered Hilda and Agnes. The next moment, Victor was in a teacher's suit. And Violet, Agnes, and Hilda were in school uniforms. Removing herself from her impalement, Violet walked up to Hilda and held both of her hands while placing her cheek against Hilda's cheek, doing the classic identical twin position. Doing it naked is fun, but role-playing is even more fun. Right, teacher? What are you going to do with the triplets of the Snow clan who were being disobedient? Joining in the fun, Victor completely assumed the role of teacher. He lightly touched the table and spoke with a serious face and a deep voice. Many things, my stupid students who don't learn. Many things. Hilda, Violet, and Agnes swallowed hard. You don't do your homework, and you don't respect this beautiful institution. You need to be disciplined thoroughly. Victor's eyes flashed dangerously. He raised his hand, and a paddle that was made to punish naughty children was created. In the past, it was said that bad students only learn through the discipline of the flesh. I will use these barbaric methods to see if it is effective. And no, you can't do that, teacher. Aren't you afraid of being fired? Violet spoke as she did something similar to a dance while dragging Hilda with her, and with a few steps, she approached Agnes, making the other side of Hilda's cheek practically stick to Agnes. Violet took the three women's hands and trembled with fear. Your role was to be the most cowardly of the triplets. It took her a while to get into the role, but Agnes immediately understood. She was the impetuous triplet, while Hilda was the cold and rational triplet. Don't touch my sister, you bastard. I'll report you to the principal, and your career will be ruined. Disciplining my students is my duty. So what if I get fired? So what if my reputation is tarnished? My principle is to properly teach you three stupid triplets. Victor stood up from his chair, showing his fully erect member. Scary. Come here. Ian, don't do that, teacher. Elon. You bastard. Han. Don't touch me. I'm not like my sisters on . The office in the Emperor's chambers shook a bit today, but fortunately, this mansion was made from the strongest materials in the world and was covered in runes. Thanks to this, nothing could be felt or heard outside the Emperor's wives' area. Straight Face. Edited by Davo 2138 is unavailable. If you want to support me so that hot springs built in Victor's quarters. Victor was sitting in the hot springs, staring at the stars above the horizon. On his lap was a woman with short white hair that covered her right eye, making up and down movements while kissing and licking Victor's neck. Hilda Snow, or Hilda Elderblood, had proven to be a very passionate lover, something that was quite common among the members of the Snow clan but which she had not shown for years due to her not having any partners. When Victor fanned her flames, just like Agnes, she exploded with intense love. Combining those emotions with the change of race, as a result, she practically could not detach herself from Victor, even though her entire insides were completely filled. Thinking about tea now, we really got used living at this height, Violet said as she washed her hair some distance away from Victor. I am - Agnes made an audible sound. She was in the hot spring, but her face was catatonic at the moment, and she needed a few minutes to recover. The inconvenience in the past was that all of our household items were not our size, but now the entire mansion has been modified to suit our new heights, Victor spoke. With the modifications made, if a normal human were to enter this place, they would really say, oh, this really is the house of the gods. Everything was simply huge to suit their new height. Thanks to the runes, we can always shrink everything back to normal sizes, so it's not inconvenient, Violet spoke as she made a lot of foam on her head. True. At first, they did this to get used to walking around faster at a height they didn't have before, but in the end, they ultimately got used to their new height. Although, there were some women who preferred to stay their normal form, like Hilda and Anna. Victor squeezed Hilda's ass and impaled her hard while biting her neck. Ha dash, she screamed loudly as she felt more liquids entering her. Her body shuddered with Victor's bite, and her eyes shone slightly. She almost fainted, but out of pure desire, she remained conscious. When her orgasm subsided, she began to move slowly again, still impaled. She's insatiable. I'm surprised she's like that, Violet said, genuinely surprised, but soon she went back to washing her hair. Years. Agnes slowly lowered her ass that was still raised after receiving his load and sat down in the hot spring. Years without a lover does that to a person. And like every good member of the Snow clan, she doesn't go after strangers to satisfy herself. But she also doesn't go around looking for a suitable lover. After all, Hilda's standards are very high. Taking a deep breath, Agnes wet her face. Concerns about Victor's and her own liquids? She didn't have any. First, she had bathed in Victor's seed many, many times. Second, they were dragons, beings of nature. Their liquids didn't stink, weren't disgusting, and weren't harmful. In fact, it was the complete opposite. Victor's taste suited his partner's tastes, and his seed, full of vitality, was so potent that even a drop of it could revitalize an entire dead forest. There was a reason why the nature of this planet was so rich and alive. It wasn't just the goddesses helping. The very fact that Victor lived here helped too. A simple fruit from this planet had so many nutrients that a normal person could die simply by eating it. If administered correctly, the life of this being could even be extended by a few hundred years. Being bathed externally and internally by this seed did wonders for their bodies, especially since he was their progenitor. I see, that makes sense. Picking up a toothbrush, she looked at the mirror and smiled, her teeth shining very sharply, and soon she began to brush her teeth. I wonder why you still do that. As dragons, our bodies are always clean, Agnes asked as she looked around using her draconic senses. Seeing that the time barrier was active, she allowed herself to relax more. Spitting the toothpaste into the sink, she said, just because our bodies are always clean, doesn't mean we should lose our cleanliness habits. Routines are important. Agnes saw wisdom in her daughter's words, and if it were any other time, she would have joined her daughter in taking it easy. However, for now, she simply couldn't bring herself to care. Yes, she was simply lazy after receiving several doses of love. Speaking of doses of love, she looked at Violet suspiciously. What? Violet raised an eyebrow when she saw her mother's face. How are you completely fine? Agnes wasted no time quickly questioning. It was worth mentioning that Violet was the one who had received most of Victor's love so far. After all, she was the one who pushed his buttons to start all this, so it didn't make sense that she was completely fine, while Agnes was completely worn out. Violet displayed a big, satisfied smile and pointed to her head, specifically the violet crown that represented her authority. My divinity places my vision of order in everything I want, and a worn-out body means disorder. To me. So using this divinity, you can always stay at the top of your game. And this effect probably applies to the soul as well. If it weren't for that, there would be no way you would be fine. Agnes completed Violet's words. After all, procreating with Victor was not a simple carnal act, it was an act of the union between souls. Exactly. Violet smiled with satisfaction, making her enormous breasts sway. Due to her 5-meter-tall form, her breasts were much larger than a human's head, but it was still proportional to her size, and it didn't look strange on her. What a broken divinity. Maybe, you, Aphrodite, and Jean will be the only ones who will last longer now in our nights, Agnes said. Maybe, Violet said as she went back to taking care of herself. She looked down, seeing everything as perfect as she liked, and nodded, satisfied. Agnes narrowed her eyes at her daughter. This evasive way of speaking meant that she was planning something, and she knew her daughter too well to not read between the lines of her intentions. What is she planning now? Agnes thought, but in her current state, she simply couldn't care less about whatever her daughter was thinking of doing. Her daughter was the empress, not her. Victor, Violet called her husband. Victor, who was almost asleep with the comfortable feeling of Hilda on his chest, woke up. Blinked his eyes, and looked at Hilda, who was also resting on his chest. He smiled slightly and combed her hair back, removing all the hair from her face so that he could see her perfect face. Completely. Why did you allow our daughters to go help in the Empire? She asked casually as she stood up and walked towards the hot spring. He did what? Agnes, who was drowsy, woke up completely and looked at Victor with a serious expression. No need to shout, Mother, I've done this before. I even used the 99 secret techniques on him. Violet laughed. And it worked? Of course not. She rolled her eyes. If those stupid techniques worked on Victor, the gods would have defeated him long ago. Although, as Darling said, the potential to use this on armies is very high, especially techniques 90 to 99 that deal with a being's mental states. Violet didn't completely rule out her side project. I know. I'll teach these techniques to my daughters. If some idiot tries to flirt with them, fufufu. Violet laughed evilly. As expected of my husband. Agnes nodded in satisfaction and looked strangely at her daughter, who was smiling like a villain but then ignored her, her intense gaze soon returning. Why? Why did you allow them to help? I thought it was time for them to deal with the Empire's affairs. As Victor began to speak, he was interrupted. I see, you felt sorry. Agnes and Violet knew him too well for that lame excuse to work. Victor's lips trembled as he heard the two women speaking in unison. Anna was in charge of our daughters in our absence, so she must have made a report, Agnes said, opening the holographic interface in front of her. Violet knew this, too, but she wanted to hear her husband's reasons, not a report. Victor sighed, gently caressing Hilda, easing the tiredness in her soul a little and helping her body go through the transition more smoothly. Hilda showed a small, satisfied smile and snuggled into Victor's chest. Stella was crying, he murmured, still caressing Hilda. Ah. Mother and daughter exclaimed at the same time, understanding everything now with that simple sentence. Honestly, darling, you're too soft. Agnes sighed as she closed Anna's report after briefly reading it. Pepper and Victor were on the same level of weakness for their daughters. The difference was that Victor knew how to act tough and responsible when necessary, while Pepper was like those super kind grandmothers who let their grandson do whatever they wanted. I just can't say no when they just genuinely want to help me. Victor was not able to return genuine goodwill with ill will. His dogma was an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and blood for blood. And that never changed. A genuine desire to help, huh? Violet's eyes sparkled, and her gaze passed through the time barrier that Victor had created and went towards the side of her daughter's mansion. Seeing her daughters wearing their divine raiments created specifically by Victor and using their shape-shifting to reach a height that ranged from meters to 4.5 meters, she assessed their expressions. As their mother, Violet didn't need any power to see through her daughters, she knew them very well. Behind their lively eyes was a genuine desire to help the Empire and not simple curiosity about their father's work like before. That same sight was also being seen by Agnes now. Violet closed her eyes and said, I understand now. See? I can't deny a request after seeing that. Victor justified himself. That's true. It seems that the training in the dream world was quite effective. Agnes said. Yes, but not completely, Victor explained next. The dream world was fake. Even though they felt like reality, they knew it was fake because of their high perception of the truth of the world as dragon goddesses, therefore, unconsciously, they didn't take that world as seriously as they should have. One of the mistakes you predicted would happen before starting this training, Violet said as she approached Victor and rested her head on his shoulder. Looking at Hilda, she smiled slightly. Sneakily, she pinched Hilda's nipples who moaned lightly in her sleep, and then caressed and pulled her clitoris. I am even in her sleep, Hilda moaned and began to move her hips slowly. So insatiable. Are you sure she's not a succubus disguised as a vampire? Violet laughed and then stopped teasing the woman and just rested her head on Victor's chest. Ignoring Violet's antics, he continued, exactly, even with my warning, they still subconsciously thought of that world as false. A problem that could easily be solved by me temporarily erasing their memories so that they forget about us and actually live in that world. Or by creating a situation where they don't remember anything about my power or the Empire and think that we are from that world. Something like entering the Matrix, huh, Agnes said. Exactly, but I will never violate my daughter's memories in that way, even if the goal is to train them and prepare them effectively, Victor said with disgust. Akasha is the most mentally developed of our daughters because she has the filtered memories of several primordial gods. She knows the weight of what we are doing here. Some of our more mature daughters understand this too, but not all of them. Whether they wanted to or not, they were still young dragons. They could receive knowledge, but understanding was a different matter. For example, humans understand the dangers of war, but you saw the news of a war on TV, you would be indifferent and not care much. But when you suffer the effects of war, you will genuinely understand the weight of war. The same applied here. Victor's older daughters understood the weight of the Empire and what Victor was doing, while the others were aware of the situation but did not fully understand it. Therefore, in order to prepare them for the future where we fight in a war between galaxies and dimensions, I was planning to take them to the battlefield. Huh. For a moment, Violet and Agnes thought they had suddenly gone deaf. They could not believe what they heard from Victor. No. Are you crazy? That is a big no. Agnes roared as the information was processed in her head.